November is more than election time and everyone's favorite holiday of Thanksgiving. This is also the month and weekend, as we've prayed tonight, of Veterans Day on November 11th. Veterans Day passes almost unnoticed in too many circles. It shouldn't. The memory of supreme sacrifice and commitment in Jewish terms is a sacred mitzvah, and that is why I wanted to do something special, not just something casual, but focused about veterans on this particular Shabbat. Who is a vet? It's been said that you can't tell a vet just by looking. He's the white-haired old guy bagging groceries at the supermarket, aggravatingly slow, who helped liberate a Nazi death camp. Who is a vet? She is the field nurse who, against futility in Vietnam, went to sleep sobbing every night for 2 years. Who is a vet? He is the POW who went away one person and came back another. We have let down veterans in many ways over the years. Today, more than 80,000 vets are homeless, and many more are unemployed. And ironically, many more veterans are now coming home with severe injuries, not just loss of limbs, but loss of everything but brain activity, because we have learned to be so much better technologically when it comes to saving lives on the battlefield. So many of the wounded would have simply died in earlier wars. Shame on my generation, and shame on all of us for forgetting the over 2 million service members who have been to Iraq and Afghanistan and returned just since 2001. And many times that number of Americans have been affected as spouses, parents, children, and friends. They've each coped with their loved one's absence, worried for their safety, and dealt with the changed husband or wife who usually returns. And while the resilience of veterans is real, and I get chills every time the veterans from World War II march with the flag, I have learned that the burdens of our most recent wars that have fallen on veterans and their families include, and I'm not exaggerating, higher rates of suicide and mental illness, increased drug and alcohol dependence, higher rates of violence, including homicide and child neglect, both among the parent left behind and by the returning veteran, high-risk behaviors that have resulted in elevated numbers of car crashes and drug overdoses, elevated levels of homelessness and divorce, and clinical levels of stress among the children. The causes of these elevated levels of suffering and chaos in veterans and their families' lives are complex, and they're not all simply the direct result of combat exposure. The factors contributing to this large number and overwhelming scale of problems are not all fully understood. I'm not suggesting that. But the statistics are staggering, alarming, and our neglect of the men and women coming home troubles me greatly. Sure, at a Grizzlies game tonight or a football game tomorrow, we'll salute a hand-picked serviceman or servicewoman. The crowd will stand and clap. Then we'll return to the game, to our daily lives as the VA hospital a few blocks from FedEx Forum has to hire more and more psychologists this month to deal with traumatized men and women coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan. So what unites these young soldiers and the veterans who stood in this service, younger and oldest? An unknown author writes, and I quote, "A vet is an ordinary and extraordinary human being, someone who offered his or her life's most vital years in the service of country." In this week's Torah portion, Sarah dies, and Abraham seeks out a burial place for his beloved wife, Sarah. It's the first time anyone has purchased a cemetery plot in history that we know of. And Ephron the Hittite offers Abraham a resting place for his wife because Abraham's a big guy. He's the first Jew. He's the man. And Ephron the Hittite is honored and offers him a place for his wife. And Abraham replies, "B'chesef maleh yitnena li betochechem la'achuzat kaver," which means, Ephron, I want to pay the full price. I want to pay 400 shekels of silver, even if I'm the elect of the people, because for my Sarah, I give it all. Do you know what 400 shekels of silver that Abraham gave Ephron the Hittite is worth today in modern currency? $18,000. Quite a lot for a burial plot in any generation, even our own. But Abraham wasn't looking for a bargain. He wanted an achuzat kaver, a sure possession for his beloved wife. To receive full value, Abraham insisted on sacrificing full value, kesef maleh. In the important areas of life, there are no bargains. You have to give it your all. So tonight, in this brief sermon, I guess I'm asking, do we give it our all for our country? Do we really sacrifice anything unless you're a vet? Or do we give back pennies we call tzedakah, or standing ovations before ball games we plan our lives and our kids' lives around? This veteran Shabbat ought to give us good reason to pause. Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation summarizes so well the heroism of ordinary people who no longer bug me in the post office when I'm in line, or the ones in our Torah study that meets tomorrow morning at 8:45. At the end of his book, Brokaw concludes, and I quote, "I thought of the farmers, the merchants, and all their families who had gone through so much to start communities, build schools and churches, and look after one another. They had gone off to war or sent their husbands, sons, and boyfriends, and now they lie side by side beneath the sod, testimony to sacrifice and service. Those whose graves were decorated with the small flags were carrying the colors for all the others." As faithful Jews and faithful Americans, our greatest tributes to that greatest generation may very well be to spend more time with this generation's veterans, and perhaps to emulate in some small way every vet's example of sacrifice and selflessness. Who but they have taught us that everyday people can do remarkable things. In closing, we live in the finest, greatest nation the world has ever known. But we will never be able to repay the debt of gratitude we owe our veterans, including those coming home this weekend. So let us welcome them. Let us remember them when we see those flags in our yards. And let us give thanks with more than lip service. And let us say, Amen.